We all know Star Wars. Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, and Han Solo. It's the adventure sci-fi movie that took the nation by force. It made a huge imprint on America and the world. It changed filmmaking techniques to a whole new level. It created a wave of inspiration and imagination. Even today, when most movies of the 70s are now forgotten by today's generation, Star Wars is still everywhere. Called the most influential film of all time, Star Wars is something of our wildest imaginations. Surprisingly, it was made in an era of bleakness. Politics were going downhill, and it was a time of protest and of bitter change. It wasn't the happiest time in America. Movies in Hollywood were downbeat and gritty, just like the politics. The protagonists in the usual mean movies were usually mean and tended to break all the rules, like the people in the current politics situation. Plots in the movies were usually about apocalypses and disasters. In the late 60s, the greatest people who started the best filmmaking companies were now retiring or selling their companies. Young people from the film schools started to take the old jobs. George Lucas was one of the newcomers. He had already made some films and received some valuable recognition from American graffiti. He already had some ideas about a 1930s space soap opera. Many people doubted this odd idea. He thought, though, it would be a fun film for young people. Nobody ever thought that this idea would grow to be what it is now. Science fiction movies at the time were not highly successful. The successful sci-fi movies made about $16 million, an example being Planet of the Apes. Most science fiction movies, though, made under $10 million, which isn't great. Finally, 20th Century Fox accepted the film and agreed to invest in the movie. Star Wars was a long story plot and eventually turned into a trilogy. It took movie techniques to a whole new level. Many companies had rid themselves of special effects departments because at that time people preferred more realistic movies and it was considered an unnecessary expense. George Lucas and everyone else involved in this movie looked into digital effects. They viewed it as a very big, risky experiment. Richard Edlund, so-called Robot Nut, helped adapt the film into more realistic effects. John Dykstra to keep the visual effects realistic by working constantly on the set and actually making computers from scratch to work better with the special effects. They created the necessary technology to keep the fantasy alive in the movie. Paul Huston and several others worked on the astounding technology in the movie. This happened to be very time-consuming. The company had spent over half their budget investing in multiple shots, but they never seemed to find anything presentable for the movie. Thus, no special effects so far. At the same time, George Lucas was having health problems that called for him to slow down working on Star Wars. With the movie having multiple problems and a due date that was very close, he instead increased his workload on Star Wars. Although it was not good for his health. Finally, after all the hard work put into Star Wars, on May 25, 1977, Star Wars was released to the public. Instantly, it blew people away. Theaters were crowded with people wanting to see it. It was considered the first blockbuster. Around the globe, it was a hit because it didn't test culture or religion or points of views. Not surprisingly, children were its biggest fans. Merchandise-producing companies couldn't keep up. Today, the merchandise is still wildly popular for Star Wars. When the Oscars came, Star Wars was nominated for 10 Oscars. They won 7 of them. It was quite an accomplishment for George Lucas and his kids' movie. Surprisingly, when it was all over, George Lucas's words were, "I'm just glad it's all over." In 2015, though, Star Wars has been rumored to return again.